Hey friends, it's Tomer, and in this video, we're going to be checking out the new Fallout Commander pre-constructed deck, Hail Caesar. We're going to look at all the brand new cards in the pre-constructed deck, and a couple of the most noteworthy reprints in the deck list as well. And we're also going to be checking out the remaining brand new cards from Scrappy Survivors Precon, the ones that weren't revealed in time for the previous video. But before we begin, a quick reminder that you can order these precons over at our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. Alright, so first I'm going to get the 8 brand new cards from Scrappy Survivors out of the way first. These are the cards that didn't make the cut when I made the video yesterday because for some reason they just weren't previewed in time. And as a quick reminder, Scrappy Survivors is a Naya pre-constructed deck that focuses both on auras, equipments, and has a junk sub-theme as well. So the first card we've got is Armory Paladin. This is a 3-mana Boros 3/3 creature human knight. It has trample, and whenever you cast an aura or equipment spell, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until the end of your next turn. Now, Armory Paladin is pretty sweet. I think it's most comparable to SRAM Senior Edificer, which does a very similar thing, but at 2 mana, and it's just straight card draw instead of impulse draw. I would say Armory Paladin has some benefits though. It's a little bit of a bigger body. It comes with trample, so it's much better as a target to be enchanted or equipped. And also the impulse draw is pretty generous. It's not until the end of your turn, the current turn, but rather the end of your next turn. So you have plenty of time to actually cast those cards. So it's basically like a slightly worse SRAM, but it's still a really good card advantage engine for any aura or equipment deck. And it's a pretty nice body as well too. The next card we've got is Crimson Caravaneer. This is a 3-mana red creature human scout. It's a 1/2 of double strike and trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a junk token. And a junk token is a brand new type of token in the Fallout set. It's an artifact that has tap it, sacrifice this artifact, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, activate only as a sorcery. So junk tokens are really strong. I consider them even better than clue tokens because clue tokens require 2 mana to draw the card, whereas this requires 0 mana. So I think it's up there with treasures, honestly, in terms of cracked tokens. So this one is able to make 2 junk tokens every single time it's attacking because it has double strike. Obviously it's a 1/2, so it needs help to actually generate its value, but it's a prime target for all the auras and equipments in the deck. And obviously if you like make this like a 5/5 or something, then it's going to be smashing for 10 trample damage. And yeah, the junk tokens are great too, but also your opponents are just going to straight up die. So I think this card is actually fantastic. It's like just a really great inclusion in any sort of aura or equipment deck that can really pump up its power. It will do a sizable amount of damage. It works very well with like the swords, for example, too. Anything with combat triggers. And then also on the side, it's making junk tokens, so it's generating a lot of card advantage at the same time. So I think this is an excellent card. Next, we've got Duchess Wayward Tavern Keep. This is a 4-mana red legendary creature human citizen. It's a 4/3 and it has 2 abilities. The first one is Hunters for Hire. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a quest counter on it, and then you can pay 1 mana, remove a quest counter from a permanent you control to create a junk token. So Duchess is very good if you are in a deck that cares about quest counters, and that's like a minor sub-theme of the Fallout decks. Like a bunch of cards just randomly care about quest counters and then do something when you have quest counters. This one removes them to make junk tokens, which is very good, but overall I'm just not very high on this card. I feel like like the quest deck is cute, but it doesn't really excite me that much. You need to have a lot of like quest generators in your deck for this ability to be good. By itself, I don't know. It's a lot of hoops to jump through to generate some card advantage, to generate some junk. So I'm not very high on Duchess. Next, we've got Super Mutant Scavenger. This is a 5-mana green creature mutant warrior. It's a 5/5 with trample. When it enters the battlefield or dies, return up to 1 target aura or equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is kind of like a Green Warden of Murasa, but better costed, but more narrow because it only affects auras and equipments. And that's a good place to be. Like, I'm not super excited about this card, but it's like a double Eternal Witness. It's a 5/5 with trample, so it already holds your auras and equips very, very well. Yeah, it's a nice filler card, I think. Then we've got Breakdown. This is a 3-mana green instant that says destroy target artifact or enchantment, and you create a junk token. I think this is kind of overcosted. Like, disenchants start at like 1 mana with like Nature's Claim and whatnot. So you really need to be super all in on junk tokens for this one to be really worth the 3 mana, I think. Like, it's not awful, but you know, it's fine. Then we've got a pretty spicy new equipment. This is pre-war formal wear. This is a 3 mana white artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield and attach formal wear to it. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has vigilance, and it has equip 3. So 3 mana, you can return a creature mana value 3 or less onto the battlefield, and then you give it +2/+2 and vigilance. The equip cost of 3 is kind of expensive, but like that ETB ability is like really good. And if you have any ways of like bouncing it or blinking it and reusing that enter the battlefield trigger, then it becomes like a miniature Sun Titan for your equipment deck that also just pumps up the creature, it resurrects and everything. I think this card is actually really good gas. Like it's cost efficient. +2/+2 and vigilance is no slouch either. Like, I really like vigilance in Commander. I like having the ability to attack and then still block. Yeah, just really good. Like, I think I would replace Sun Titan in my equipment deck with this one, honestly. Like, yeah, I can't get back lands, I can't get back equipment, obviously you can only get back creatures, but it does a really good job, and it's an equipment itself. And then we've got Acquired Mutation. This is a 3 mana red enchantment aura. Enchant creature, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded, and whenever enchanted creature attacks, defending player gets 2 rad counters. So I'm a big fan of auras that goad. I'm a big fan of the impetus cycle. I think this one is kind of the weakest of the bunch though, because yeah, it's +2/+2 and goaded, which is like the standard, but then the benefit for you is kind of low. Like, compare this to Shiny Impetus where you make treasure tokens. This one just gives the defending player 2 rad counters, which might actually benefit the player if they're like have any sort of graveyard synergies. So I'm not a big fan of that, but you know, it's cute. I could see this being played in like Mazzy, True Sword Paladin, and I'm also cooking up a sweet Feather Voltron deck that kind of uses all the impetuses, all the vows and stuff to buff Feather, but then also force the opposing creatures to attack each other. And I think Acquired Mutation is going to be fitting very nicely into both of these decks. And then the final card from Scrappy Survivors is Junktown. This is a new land. It taps for colorless, or you can pay 5 mana and tap it, so basically 6 mana total, to sacrifice Junktown, create 3 junk tokens. I think the cost of this is just too much. Like, at first blush, it looks like it has no downsides, right? It enters the battlefield untapped, it taps for a mana, and then you just pay a simple cost of 4 in a red and tap it and sacrifice it to make 3 junk tokens, right? So good. But really, it costs like 6 mana because you have to tap the land as well and then pay it 5 additional land as well too. And then you have to sacrifice it and make 3 junk tokens. I feel like this could have costed less and then not have to be sacrificed, and you just like make 1 junk token at a time, and that would have been more fine. But I don't know. I don't think it's worth what it's doing. And the cost of not being like a basic land or not tapping for colored mana is a cost, really, even though people don't consider it a cost. I assure you, my dear viewers, that not running enough basics can cost you in a game of Commander. Alright, so we're done with Scrappy Survivors. Now we're going to be moving on to Hail Caesar, and we're going to be looking at all the brand new cards from that Precon. And we're going to be starting off with the Face Commander. I've already covered it a bunch of times, but it basically tells you what this Precon is all about. It's a Mardu deck, it's all about go wide attacking, and it has a strong Aristocrats theme. So you're sacrificing the tokens that you're creating for extra value. So you're just making a bunch of tokens, you're attacking with them, and you're sacrificing them for value. It's very aggressive. It looks like a very fun deck, honestly. So Caesar, the leader, it's 4 mana, Mardu. It's a 4/4 legendary creature human soldier. Whenever you attack, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, choose 2. You create 2 1/1 red and white soldier creature tokens with haste that are tapped and attacking. You draw a card, and you lose 1 life, and Caesar can deal damage equal to the number of creature tokens you control to target opponent. So Caesar does it all for you, basically. He generates tokens, he's a sack outlet, he's card advantage, and then he's also a finisher. Like, if you just have a huge amount of creatures on the battlefield, you can start doming people to the face and finish them off that way. So honestly, Caesar for 4 mana, all this flexibility and all this power is actually just really, really good, and it does everything the deck wants to be doing, so I'm very impressed with this one. The secondary commander of the deck is Mr. House, President and CEO. This is a 3 mana Mardu 0/4 legendary artifact creature human, and whenever you roll a 4 or higher, create a 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token. If you rolled 6 or higher, instead create that token and a treasure token. And you can pay 4 mana, tap it, roll a 6-sided die plus an additional 6-sided die for each mana from treasures spent to activate this ability. So Mr. House is an awful leader for the stock Precon. This deck is all about going wide with tokens and then sacrificing them for value and attacking. And while this does generate robot tokens, it's only when you're rolling dice, and there's like only a single other card that rolls dice in the entire Precon. So you're not going to be rolling many dice at all in this Precon, other than just activating Mr. House's ability, which is not very good. Honestly, you should just be ignoring the activated ability most of the time because the primary triggered ability is actually very strong. Now, it may look like you're just rolling d6s, and then whenever you get super lucky, you get to make a 3/3 token and a treasure token. But in reality, if you're building around Mr. House, which I encourage doing outside of the stock Precon, you just run a bunch of the best d20 rollers, especially the ones that can roll d20s very mana efficiently. So Wand of Wonder is a pretty good card all by itself, but like you're rolling a d20, so odds are you're going to roll 6 or higher. You're going to make a token and a treasure token with Mr. House on the battlefield. Vexing Puzzle Box goes from like an okay mana rock by itself to a very, very good one with Mr. House, because 3 mana, and then whenever you're tapping it, you're rolling a d20 and you're making basically another robot and treasure. And then like just good cards like Ancient Copper Dragon are going to be really fun with it too. So I think Mr. House is kind of like an interesting new take on the roll d20 style archetype. Like there's not a lot of cards to work with, but I mean, you're still an artifact deck, right? You're a Mardu artifact deck. You can do artifact deck things and it's going to be super fun, but you're going to have a nice little flavor of spice with the d20 cards as well too. Another legendary card is Legate Lanius, Caesar's Ace. This is a 4 mana Rakdos, a legendary creature human soldier. It's a 2/2 and has 2 abilities. Decimate. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a 10th of the creatures they control, rounded up. And whenever an opponent sacrifices a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Legate Lanius. So Decimate is very cute. It's like historically accurate, but in Magic terms, it's still very strong. It basically just says that each opponent sacrifices a creature and you don't have to sacrifice a creature, which is very different from like the Fleshback Marauders at 3 drops where you have to sacrifice a creature too. This one, it's just your opponent sacrificing a creature. And then when your opponents are sacrificing a creature, you grow Legate Lanius, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So let's say each opponent has a creature and it's a 4-player 3-for-all game. Each opponent sacrifices a creature when you play Legate Lanius, and then Legate Lanius immediately becomes a 5/5. So I think just by casting Legate Lanius, the singular ETB trigger, just having a 5/5 on the battlefield and each opponent sacrificing a creature is just already very good. Like, yes, you could have your opponent sacrifice more than a single creature, but realistically, if your opponents have like 40 creatures and they have to sacrifice 4 of them, you're still dead. So yeah, I think the card is just actually really good. Like, it's a Fleshback Marauder, you pay an additional mana for it, but then you don't have to sacrifice the creature, and then you have a large creature that can grow even larger afterwards. So I don't like it as a commander, but if you see it as a Fleshback Marauder with extra upside, I think the card's actually quite strong. The next new card is Rose Cutthroat Raider. This is a really cool one. This is a 4 mana red legendary artifact creature robot. It's a 3/2 of first strike and has raid. At the end of combat, if you attack this turn, create a junk token for each opponent you attack this turn. And whenever you sacrifice a junk, add 1 red. So this card is like one of the best junk token generators that we've seen in the Fallout set. But not only that, it also generates a bunch of mana as you're sacrificing junk, so it helps you cast whatever you're exiling, and it kind of helps you kind of like pseudo storm off. So both of those 2 abilities together make Rose really, really good for a 4-drop. You can generate up to like 3 junk tokens per combat. Because if you have like 3 opponents in a 4-player free-for-all game, you can make 1 junk token per person. And then when you're sacrificing it, basically all the spells that you're casting off the junk tokens cost 1 less, or if you're hitting lands or whatever and you're playing a land, then you can cast like spells from your hand for less mana as well too. So it's both card advantage and mana advantage on a 4-drop, and everything is very reasonable. I think this is one of the best cards in the set, honestly. Next, we've got Eredish the Founder. This is a 3-mana white legendary creature human soldier. It's a 1/4 with Enlist. Enlist is a mechanic from Dominaria United, I think. As this creature attacks, you may tap a non-attacking creature you control without summoning Sickness. When you do, add this power to this creature's until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control attacks, if it enlisted a creature this combat, the attacking creature gains double strike until end of turn. If that creature's power is 4 or greater, draw a card. So Eredish looks like an Enlist Matters commander, but like there's barely any Enlist cards in general, and let alone mono white. So I don't think this is going to be an Enlist commander, but itself has Enlist. So what you could do is you could like just pump up Eredish, right? You could just throw on like a Blackblade Reforged, give +10/+10 or whatever, then enlist whatever other creature you have laying around to give it double strike and draw a card, and that's fine, I guess. And then in the 99 of other decks, I guess he's fine too. I don't know. I'm not super excited for him. He could kind of be a cute Voltron deck though. All right, next up, we've got Overseer of Vault 76. This is a 3-mana white legendary creature human advisor. It's a 3/3, and it has first contact whenever Overseer of Vault 76 or another creature with power 3 or less enters the battlefield under your control. Put a quest counter on it. So this is interesting. It's not dealing with power 2 or less like what usually does. It's now 3 or less. Okay, a little bit more leeway. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may remove 3 quest counters from among permanents you control. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. So in a quest matters deck, this is a great way of generating a lot of quest counters. I assume most of the creatures that care about quest counters, I think that most of the ones that we've seen already actually are on the smaller end. They're like power 3 or less, so it's going to be triggering Overseer of Vault 76 a lot. And then this provides not just a lot of quest counters, but also a finisher, a payoff for all of them. You can remove some and then give them a mini overrun. It's a permanent +1/+1 counter on all your creatures, and they get vigilance so they can safely attack and then also just block on the receiving end as well too. That's fine. I don't know. I'm not super excited about quest counters, like I said, but you can see that there is a deck over here. You just take all the cards that care about quest counters, you put them together, and it will kind of work, I guess. Then we've got McCready Little Lamplight Mare. This is a 2-mana Orzhov legendary creature human advisor. It's a 1/3, and whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, it gains Skulk until end of turn. And whenever a creature with power 4 or more attacks you, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So I think McCready does 2 things, but doesn't both kind of poorly. Like, it's a little bit of a pillow fort, but not really. It's not much of a pillow fort, and it's a little bit of evasion, but not that great evasion. So it does both things kind of poorly, and you put them together and it's still a lackluster card in my opinion. Next, we've got Mysterious Stranger. This is a 4-mana red creature human rogue. It's a 3/2 of flash, and when it enters the battlefield, for each graveyard with an instant or sorcery in it, exile target instant or sorcery card from that graveyard. If 2 or more cards are exiled this way, choose one of them at random and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So Mysterious Stranger is kind of interesting. Instant speed, you can get something out of some graveyard and cast it for free, which is pretty sweet, I guess, but it has a random factor to it, so you might not be getting the thing you actually want to be casting. This is kind of comparable to like Direfleet Daredevil, which I quite like, but I don't play as much these days, I suppose. It costs 2 mana, but it's sorcery speed because it doesn't have flash, and you can't choose your own graveyard. But the upside is that you're always going to be casting the spell you want to cast. The downside is you actually have to spend the mana to cast it. So which is better, Direfleet Daredevil or Mysterious Stranger? I think the Stranger is probably a little bit better because you don't have to spend the mana to cast the spell that you're getting, but there is the randomness factor of you don't know what you're actually going to be getting. So I don't know. I don't know which one's actually better. Honestly, I think they're both kind of mid, and I probably won't be playing either of them. But let me know, what do you think about Mysterious Stranger? Next, we've got Strength Bobblehead, Endurance Bobblehead, Charisma Bobblehead, and Luck Bobblehead. So there's 7 bobbleheads, and they just revealed the last remaining 4. I covered the previous 3 already. I don't think all 4 of these are in the Precon, but I just wanted to add them together because they all share the same template. So they're all 3 mana colorless artifacts that can tap to add 1 mana of any color, which is kind of okay. And then they all have an activated ability. You pay a certain amount of mana, tap it, and then you get something, an ability that scales up the more bobbleheads you have. So they're usually not very good when you have like 1 bobblehead on the battlefield, but if you have like 3 or more, they start becoming exceptional. So the Strength Bobblehead, it puts X +1/+1 counters on target creature where X is the number of bobbleheads you control, and you have to pay 3 mana and tap it, so it's basically essentially 4 mana total. Endurance Bobblehead, 3 mana, tap it, up to X target creatures get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn, where X is the number of bobbleheads you control as you activate this ability. Activate only as a sorcery. So this card could have been amazing as a way to just like respond to mass board wipes or whatever to save your team, but this is kind of a little bit better if you have a board wipe and you have 4 extra mana to save some of your own creatures. You could like give your stuff indestructible, swing in without any worry because, you know, blockers can't kill your creatures, and then you can follow that up with a board wipe. So like if you have like a Blasphemous Act or something like that, that makes sense. Otherwise, it might be too much mana to try to board wipe and then also pay 4 mana on top to give yourself indestructible. But I think this card's pretty cool. Charisma Bobblehead, it's 4 and tap it, so it's quite a lot of mana. Create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens where X is the number of bobbleheads you control. Activate only as a sorcery. I think this is quite reasonable. And then the final one is Luck Bobblehead. You can pay only 1 mana and tap it. Roll X 6-sided dice, where X is the number of bobbleheads you control. Create a tapped treasure token for each even result. If you rolled 6 exactly 7 times, you win the game. So this card is obviously the most exciting one. It says you win the game. I love you win the game cards, even if they're very, very difficult to actually pull off like this one. But there are a lot of cards that say, like, if you roll a dice, you could roll twice and keep the higher result or keep the result that you want to keep. So you could potentially make it so that it's reasonable to win off this thing, and even if you're not winning off of it, it could generate a bunch of treasures if you have a bunch of bobbleheads. So are bobbleheads strong? No, but they are really cute in casual, and I actually am excited to build a bobblehead deck. You know, you run all 7 bobbleheads, and then you run a bunch of ways of cloning bobbleheads, so you can have even more than 7 bobbleheads on the battlefield. They're not legendary, so you can clone them pretty easily, and then try to win with the Luck Bobblehead. Like, yeah, it's janky, it's not a good strategy, but I don't know, it appeals to me in some way. Also, you'll notice that 3 of these images are serialized cards. These are not available in the Precons. They're only available in collector boosters. You have a very low chance of opening any of those. But the regular one, like Charisma Bobblehead, are in the Precons. Next, we've got Eddie, Lonesome Eyebot. This is a 3 mana colorless legendary artifact creature robot. It's a 2/1 with flying, and it has 2 abilities. Eddie, my love. Whenever you attack, if the number of attacking creatures is greater than the number of quest counters on Eddie, Lonesome Eyebot, put a quest counter on it, and you can pay 2 mana, sacrifice Eddie, draw a card, then draw an additional card for each quest counter on Eddie. So this is just another card for the quest counter deck. I think the stats are kind of bad. It can draw a bunch of cards eventually, but it's very slow at doing so, and it's something that you really want to be dropping on like turn 3 or something to really get it going and actually drawing cards at a reasonable rate. Yeah. I don't like it. I don't like the quest count. I was talking about how much I love bobbleheads, and those are equally jank to the quest counters. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. There's something about quest counters that just doesn't resonate with me. Whereas the bobbleheads, I look at you win the game, and I'm like, ooh, shiny. But the quest counters, I don't know. So I'm being a hypocrite is what I'm trying to say. And if you like this sort of stuff, the quest counters, then this is going to be a great card for the quest counter deck. More power to you. All right, we go to our preview card, actually. This is Kellogg, Dangerous Mind. This is a 3 mana Rakdos, legendary creature, human mercenary. It's a 3/2, first strike haste. Whenever it attacks, create a treasure token, and you can sacrifice 5 treasures, gain control of target creature for as long as you control Kellogg. Activate only as a sorcery. So I think Kellogg is actually quite a strong card. For 3 mana, it can immediately be cast and immediately start attacking and generating treasure tokens. And then, yeah, 5 treasure tokens to control magic something is a lot, but there are plenty of decks that can generate a ton of treasures very, very quickly. I'm thinking like Prosper, for example. I mean, that's like the only one that you can really be thinking of in Rakdos, but like Jan Jensen or Dehada, for example, are also options as well too. And then also in those decks, if you have sack outlets, it doesn't really matter if Kellogg eventually dies. You can just sacrifice the creature before it would be returned back to the person. Stealing your opponent's commanders can actually just shut down their decks entirely. So having this sort of treasure payoff on a 3-drop is very, very powerful. And the fact that it can generate treasures as well too is quite nice as well. Next, we've got Vault 75 Middle School. This is a 4-mana white saga. It has 3 chapters. Chapter 1, exile all creatures with power 4 or greater. Chapter 2 and 3, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. I think this is one of the stronger sagas. I usually look at sagas as if their first chapter, the first chapter that you have, is very powerful, like it has most of the power in it, then the saga is usually very, very good. And this one meets that criteria. The first chapter is the most powerful chapter. It just exiles the biggest creatures on the battlefield, and if you are in a smaller creature deck, it could be a one-sided board wipe. Obviously, it's not going to take out all your opponent's creatures too, because they could have small creatures that survive as well, but if your entire deck is all just small creatures, then, you know, there's no downside for you ever. And then chapter 2 and 3 is also very nice because it just grows your army, so you can start beating down and ending your opponents. And we've seen many styles of like kill things power X or greater. We have Dustodon, which is one of my personal favorites. There's like Fell the Mighty. There's a whole bunch. So is this one of the best ones? I don't know. It really depends on what exactly the power threshold of your creatures are. Obviously, like killing stuff power 3 or greater is going to be a lot better if your creatures are not power 3 or greater. Power 4 is pretty lenient. But yeah. I think it is a very good card and it should show up in a lot of decks that care about low power. Next is Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty. This is a 3-mana Boros, legendary creature human knight. It's a 3/2 and has Battalion. Whenever Paladin Elizabeth and at least 2 other creatures attack, draw a card, then you may put a creature card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, where X is Elizabeth's power. This card is actually just really good, right? Like, you need to attack with 3 creatures, so there is a cost to this ability, but then you get to draw a card, and then you get to immediately put something onto the battlefield tapped. Obviously, you need to have something in your hand to put onto the battlefield, but this is both card advantage and mana advantage and like pseudo haste because it puts it immediately onto the battlefield. So that's a lot of things that are very, very good. Obviously, it's a hoop to jump through. You have to attack with 3 things. Elizabeth is just a 3/2, so you need to give it some sort of evasion or some sort of way for your creatures to survive combat, but the payoff is definitely there. So I don't know, maybe it's a little bit too much to work around, but like the payoff is really good. And it's a very interesting card, and in the decks that can run this, like make sure that Elizabeth is not dying and it's creature heavy, maybe pump up Elizabeth's power as well too, though I don't think that's really necessary. This can do serious work in terms of card advantage, mana advantage, and pseudo haste. Next, we've got Craig Boone, Novak Guard. This is a 3-mana Boros, legendary creature human soldier. It's a 3/3 with reach, lifelink, and 1 for my baby. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, put 2 quest counters on Craig Boone. When you do, Craig deals damage equal to the number of quest counters on it to up to 1 target creature unless that creature's controller has Craig deal that much damage to them. So this is another one for the quest counter deck, but also I think this is actually a powerful commander. You need to attack with a bunch of creatures. You don't necessarily need to attack with Craig though. And then you generate a bunch of quest counters, and then Craig starts taking out opposing creatures, and your opponents can redirect this to their phase. So yeah, the first time they'll just take 2. You gain 2 as well because Craig has lifelink, but the quest counters add up pretty quickly. and eventually your opponents will just not be able to be continually taking that much damage to the face over and over again. It is an interesting build around, honestly. You could run stuff like Proliferate, extra combats, Strionic Resonator effects, stuff to double that attack trigger, and the damage will start adding up very, very quickly. So yeah, I think this is an interesting build around. Moving on, we have Elder Arthur Maxon. This is a 3-mana Orzhov legendary creature human knight. It's a 4/2, and it has creature tokens you control have training and blind betrayal. Sacrifice another creature. Elder Maxon gains indestructible until end of turn. So this is a nice little payoff for a creature token deck, a go wide deck such as this Precon. It grows all your creatures with training. It's kind of similar to Taurens, I suppose. And then it's also kind of nice that, you know, your go wide token lord can just become indestructible when you need it to be. So you just sacrifice a token in response to a board wipe or something, and then it gets indestructible. Or, you know, somebody tries to remove it for any non-exile way, you can just sacrifice just a random 1/1 token or whatever and give it indestructible. And that's a lot of value for a 3-drop. I mean, just giving all your creature tokens training is nice. It's like a small anthem. You have to work for it a little bit, and you have to have the right situation for it, but it is a nice anthem. And then just having constant source of indestructibility is also really good. So yeah, I can see this actually being played in the 99 of a bunch of like aristocrats decks. Next, we've got Camp. This is a 3-mana colorless artifact fortification. Whenever a fortified land is tapped for mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If that creature shares a color with the mana that land produced, create a junk token, and you can fortify for 3 mana. And fortify means pay 3 mana, attach it to target land you control, fortify only as a sorcery. The first fortification was printed in Future Sight in, I believe, 2007, and it was one of many cards that were just kind of printed in there as like potential card types or potential mechanics, like really cool things, such as like Gravestorm was in there as well too, I believe, in like the Time Spiral block. And a lot of those things kind of just like sat as one-offs for many years. And now we're seeing, you know, some of them show up as a 2nd or 3rd card, and we just got our 2nd fortification of Camp. So that's really cool. I think the card is kind of bad, but I do like that they brought back fortification. I think that's quite cool. I think paying like 6 mana for this ability total is not very good, but, you know, it's cool. Next, we've got the Nipton Lottery. This is a 4-mana Rakdos sorcery that says choose a creature at random. You gain control of that creature until end of turn, untap it, it gains haste until end of turn, then destroy all other creatures. We got better board wipes than this, right? I don't like this one. Okay, next. Desdemona, Freedom's Edge. This is a 4-mana Boros, legendary creature human rogue. It's a 3/4 with vigilance, and whenever it attacks, target creature card in your graveyard that's an artifact or that has mana value 3 or less gains escape until end of turn. The escape cost is equal to its mana cost plus 2 other cards from your graveyard. So I'm not a fan of this one. It kind of is acting like a pseudo Sun Titan, but he has to still pay the mana cost to actually return the creature card to the battlefield. And you also have to exile stuff from your graveyard as well too, so it has an additional cost. And this is also an attack trigger, like Desmedona has to be attacking, and she's just a 3/4, so you need to make sure that she survives as well too. So there's a bit of a hoop to jump through, but then also the payoff is just not very good. If you didn't have to pay the mana for returning the thing and you just had to pay like escape, then I think this card would have been quite strong, but as is, I'm just not a fan. Moving on, we got Boomer Scrapper. This is a 3-mana Rakdos creature human soldier. It's a 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you lose 1 life and create a junk token. Whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Boomer Scrapper. Alright, so this card is actually bonkers. I know it's kind of a meme to say that anytime there's a card that cares about like cards from exile, casting from exile, blah, 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 blah. It's like broken in Prosper, but like really, look at this card. Look at this card. It makes junk tokens super easily when it ETBs or it attacks. And as you're sacrificing the treasure tokens that you're making with Prosper or the junk tokens that you're making with the Boomer Scrapper and other cards, it gets really, really big. So the idea here is you play Boomer Scrapper, you use the junk token, you make a bunch of treasures, you grow Boomer Scrapper so then it can start attacking easily and not die. And then it becomes just a huge threat that continually feeds Prosper and is just like, ridiculous. Yeah, that's a lot of value for a 3-drop. I think Good and Prosper actually makes a lot of sense here. I think this card is very good in Prosper. All right, next up we've got Securitron Squadron. This is a 2-mana white artifact creature robot. It has squad 3, and it's a 2/2, sorry. It has vigilance, and whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This card is actually quite sweet, I think. It's a nice little anthem for your token decks. It kind of works like, what was it, Metallic Mimic or something? It kind of works like Metallic Mimic, but for creature tokens. And the squad 3 makes it particularly interesting because, like, let's say you make one squad out of it. So you pay 5 mana, you make this one, the original copy, and a token copy of it. Both see each other enter the battlefield. So the original will be a 2/2 because it's not a token, but then the token copy will get 2 +1/+1 counters on it, so it's going to be a 4/4. And then same thing, like if you squad, higher than that, all of them see each other entering the battlefield at the same time, so they get really, really big. The token copies are going to be very, very big, but even by itself, it's actually a pretty decent anthem if you just drop a turn 2 and then start making tokens afterwards. So I actually see the Squadron showing up as a reasonable option for a bunch of different token decks like Gyrid, Ginny Faye, Thalys. I think they're all going to be pretty nice here, actually. It's not like busted or anything, but it's very, very good. Next, we've got Sierra, Nuka's biggest fan. This is a 4-mana white legendary creature human citizen. It's a 3/4, and it has the Nuka-Cola challenge. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, put a quest counter on Sierra and create a food token. And whenever you sacrifice a food, target creature you control gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of quest counters on Sierra. So I think Sierra is going to be actually kind of nice in a bunch of food decks. You just have to attack with one or more creatures. You don't have to necessarily attack with Sierra, who herself, she doesn't have like evasion or anything. So you just attack with anything. You'll get a food token, you'll get a quest token, so that's pretty reasonable. And then when you're sacrificing food, you get to just pump up stuff. And in decks that can generate a bunch of food very, very easily, like Frodo and Sam, then yeah, the pump effect is actually going to be pretty sweet, I think. And, it's another source of food as well, too. I think that's a pretty reasonable for the mana cost and everything, and it's not a huge hoop to jump through. Yeah, it's going to be pretty nice in food decks. All right, next we've got Colonel or Colonel. I don't actually know how to pronounce that word. I need to ask Seth. Colonel, Colonel. I think it's Colonel. Colonel Autumn. It's a 3-mana Orzhov, 2/3, legendary creature, human soldier. It has lifelink and exploit. When this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. Other legendary creatures you control have exploit. Whenever a creature you control exploits a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This is kind of interesting. So this is good for like a go wide token deck that runs a decent amount of legendary creatures, and then you just sacrifice like a random 1/1 and you grow your entire army. I think that's pretty reasonable, and I like that it has lifelink as well too. So as it grows, you're going to be gaining more life as well too as you're attacking and blocking. I think that's very reasonable. Next, we've got Diamond City. It's a new land. It enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. It taps for colorless, and you can tap it to move a shield counter from Diamond City onto target creature. Activate only if 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So I actually like this land a lot. Like, okay, it taps for colorless. It's not a basic, that makes me sad, obviously. But it enters the battlefield untapped. It enters with a shield counter on it, which can be like proliferated, so you can get more shield counters on it or whatever. And then the cost of moving the shield counter over to another creature is just tapping it and then having 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield this turn, which I think a lot of creature decks can do. Not just token decks, but like regular creature decks can actually pull off pretty reasonably. So the mana cost is very, very low to put that shield counter on something. And then if you are in like a proliferate deck or something like that, you can generate a lot of shield counters before moving them off of the Diamond City onto other creatures. So like if you're in like a Traxxer or something like that, and you want to be a little bit safer from board wipes, then this card is actually straight gas, I think. So yeah, I definitely approve of this colorless land. All right, next up we got Wasteland Raider. This is a 4-mana black creature, human mercenary. It's a 4/3 with squad 2, and when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Now, compared to other similar cards like Fleshbag Marauder and Legate Lanius, I think the Wasteland Raider is kind of interesting in that you don't actually want to be sacrificing the Raiders. The Raiders are quite big, right? They're 4/3s. So I think the best case scenario with the Raiders is you have like a bunch of like 1/1 creature tokens, and then you cast the Raider either for 4 mana or you squad it up. You sacrifice the 1/1s, you upgrade them into 4/3s, and then your opponents sacrifice a bunch of more important creatures as well too. So I think it provides a different function than like a Fleshbag Marauder, for example, where the Fleshbag Marauder, its main strategy is just to play it and then sacrifice it itself. And go from there. I also wanted to compare it to Legate Lanius, which I actually really like a lot. It's 4 mana, but then each opponent sacrifices a creature essentially, and you don't have to, and then it grows as well too, so it can be like immediately a 5/5 if your opponents each sacrificed a creature in a 4-player game. So I think Legate Lanius is actually better, but the Wasteland Raider is actually an interesting card, and I don't know, I like it. It's kind of cool. It definitely functions very well in a token style deck. Next we've got Battle of Hoover Dam. It's a 4-mana white enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, choose NCR or Legion. So if you chose NCR, at the beginning of your end step, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And if you chose Legion, whenever a creature you control dies, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. This is interesting. It has flexibility here. Like if you are going more aristocrat-y, then you want to choose Legion and start pumping up some of your creatures. If you are just, not going super aristocrat-y, or you are going aristocrat-y, but you have nothing to sacrifice anymore, you can start reanimating stuff if you chose NCR. And the finality counter kind of is a bummer. But the flexibility is kind of cute over here. The biggest thing that I don't like about this though is it's a battle, but it doesn't have the battle card type. Come on, Wizards, come on. If it's a Battle of Hoover Dam, it's gotta be a battle card, right? But I actually think this card is gonna be pretty sick in not just this Precon, obviously, it's very good in this Precon, but I keep alluding to the Ikoria Mardu Human Aristocrats, and one of my favorite decks actually is Trin and Sylvar. And I think it's actually going to be pretty good here. I think you usually want to be picking Legion. You have Legion and you have like Sylvar on the battlefield. You sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff and then you just smash somebody for lethal with Sylvar. Like that just makes me super happy. I don't know. And then if you don't have anything on the battlefield, you choose NCR and you start getting stuff back. So yeah, I actually like this enchantment. It's kind of cute. I don't like that it's an enchantment and not a battle, but you know what? I'll get over it. Then we've got Butch Deloria Tunnel Snake. It's a 2-mana black legendary creature, human rogue. It's a 2/2 with menace and 2 abilities. Tunnel Snake's rule: whenever Butch attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other rogue and or snake you control. And you can pay 2 mana, 1 in a black, put a menace counter on another target creature. It becomes a rogue in addition to its other types. I don't like it. I don't like it. I was even thinking maybe I'll put it in Skullbriar, but I don't like it. It just does a lot of damage, maybe, potentially, if you have a big board state, but like, nah, moving on. Next, we've got Ruthless Rad Rat. This is a 3-mana black creature. Rat Mutant is a 2/2 with squad, but the squad does not mana cost. Instead, you exile 4 cards from your graveyard, and it has menace. So the payoff here is it's a 3-mana 2/2 with menace, which is bad, but you could like exile your entire graveyard and make a couple more 2/2 menaces. I don't like this. This is bad. Pass. All right, this one's broken. Wild Wasteland. This is a 3-mana red enchantment that says skip your draw step, very bad, but at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So this is basically the red Phyrexian Arena. It's generating you an extra card every single turn because you're skipping your draw step, but you're getting 2 cards exiled from the top of the library and you can play it this turn. Obviously, that's kind of bad, right? Like, it's worse than Phyrexian Arena in most cases. It's not like a slam dunk in most red decks. But again, if you're in the Exile Matters archetype like Prosper and Faldorn, then this is just heaven sent, right? Like, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll skip my draw phase and I'll get to trigger my Prosper and my Faldorn way more times. So that's freaking awesome. So yeah, it's not like broken or anything. It's just good. It's quite good in Exile Matters style decks. Not like generically good, but specifically good. Next is Thrill-Kill Disciple. It's a 3-mana red creature human mercenary. It's a 3/2 as squad 1, and you have to discard a card. And when Thrill-Kill Disciple dies, you create a junk token. This one's kind of interesting. You get to discard a bunch of cards. So in a deck that cares about discarding, like Intier or whatever, then this is actually not that big of a deal to do. And the squad cost is pretty low. And then when it dies, you get to make junk tokens, which is also really good too. I think this is pretty cute in like a discard deck, honestly. Like a Madness deck or whatever, or even like a junk deck, honestly, too. Then we've got White Glove Gourmand. This is a 4-mana Orzhov 2/2 creature human noble. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens. And at the beginning of your end step, if another human died under your control this turn, you create a food token. So 4 mana, you got 4 power on the battlefield, 2/2, and then 2 1/1s. If you sacrifice them, you get to make up to 1 food token each turn cycle. I don't like it. I don't think the payoff is worth it. No, I don't like it. Pass. All right, next we've got Vault 11 Voter's Dilemma. This is a 4-mana Orzhov saga. It has 3 chapters. The first chapter is, for each opponent, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So again, a 4-player free-for-all, you're going to be making 3 human tokens, assuming all your opponents are still alive. And then the chapter 2 and 3, each player secretly votes for up to 1 creature. Then those votes are revealed. If no creature got votes, each player draws a card. Otherwise, destroy each creature with the most votes or tied for the most votes. So this is a pretty cute card. You're going to make like 3 human soldier tokens, and then you're probably going to blow up something that isn't yours, hopefully. I don't know. This is kind of weird, right? Like, in what situation would actually nobody vote on a creature, right? Like, obviously, as the person who's the owner of the vault, you're going to want to vote on one of your opponent's creatures. Because I think the absolute worst thing is that if nobody votes on a creature, then everybody gets to draw a card, and you're like down, you're down cards relative to the rest of the table. So that like super sucks as the person who casts this vault. So you're going to be voting on something your opponents control, but then your opponents can just like vote on your creatures or whatever and then come out ahead on this. I don't know. I don't really like this card. Let me know what you think about this card. Maybe my smooth brain cannot comprehend how it's actually going to be playing out, but I don't think it's worth it. It's definitely not as like fun as Prisoner's Dilemma, I think. The final new card in the Precon is Survivor's Medkit. It's a 1-mana colorless artifact. You can pay 1 mana and tap it. Choose one that hasn't been chosen. So Stimpak is draw a card. Fancy Lads Snack Cakes create a food token, and then Rad Away. Target player loses all rad counters. Sacrifice Survivor's Medkit. So okay, so for 1 mana, you can pay an additional mana, so 2 mana total. You'll be drawing a card. Then 3 mana total. You've drawn a card and you've made a food token. Then 4 mana total. You lose all rad counters and then you sack it. This card's bad, right? Like I don't like this. I don't know. Yeah, meh. I don't like it. Next. So those are all the brand new cards, and now I'm going to look at the top most expensive reprints from the deck list. So the most expensive one is Skull Clamp. It's around $10. It's not popping up on the slideshow, but it's around $10, so it's a really nice reprint. Fervent Charge is like the first reprint in a very, very long time. It also, Pitiless Plunderer and Fervent Charge, they're both going to be getting in-universe artwork. We just don't have it yet. But yeah, those are pretty cool reprints to get. Fervent Charge and Pitiless Plunderer is just like a staple in Commander for all Aristocrat decks. And then another really big one is Ruinous Ultimatum. It's a great card in any Mardu deck. One-sided board wipe is just super nice, and it's at $6. So the reprint value is not overall, not as high as like the previous set, like Murders at Karlov Manor. But all of them are at least in-universe reprints, so if you're a big fan of the Fallout universe, it's cool to see a bunch of reprints showing up with brand new art at least, so yay for that. So that's the Hail Caesar Precon deck. You can see the full deck list on the screen right now. We don't have all the card arts for the reprints, so don't worry if you see like a Theros mountain or whatever. The actual Precon is going to have a Fallout in-universe mountain. Every single card is going to have Fallout art in it, which is going to be very, very sweet. I'm going to be back tomorrow with another Precon breakdown, so be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a video. That's all for now, so until next time, friends. See ya!